The entire village gathered in the open square, murmuring in disbelief. The elders sat in a circle, shaking their heads, and the women exchanged worried glances. The news had spread fast, like wildfire in the dry season. Kesi, the beautiful daughter of Chief Badu, was pregnant. And not by her betrothed, Lamu. Worse, her family had just demanded an outrageously high bride price from Lamu's family. It was a scandal that threatened to tear the village apart. It all began when Lamu, a young farmer from the neighboring village of Noro, fell in love with Kesi. She was known for her striking beauty, but also for her grace and gentle spirit. Her parents, Chief Badu and his wife, Omi, were well respected in the village of Maku. Everyone knew the chief's family held their heads high, proud of their heritage. When Lamu first asked for Kesi's hand in marriage, her parents welcomed him warmly. He had proven himself a hard worker and came from a family with good standing. But the joy quickly turned sour when Chief Badu presented his demands for the bride price. He wanted more than anyone had ever asked in the village: 100 cows, 10 goats, and a large amount of gold coins. Lamu's family was stunned. Even for a family of their wealth, the bride price was too high. His father, Alumo, tried to negotiate with Chief Badu, but the chief stood firm. "My daughter is not just any girl," he said proudly. "She is a daughter of chiefs. If your son wants to marry her, he must prove he is worthy." Word of the negotiations spread quickly through both villages. The elders of Noro gathered to discuss the issue, and many felt that Chief Badu's demand was unreasonable. But Lamu was deeply in love with Kesi, and despite the tension, he was determined to find a way to pay the bride price. While the families continued their negotiations, Lamu visited Kesi in secret. They would meet by the river, where they spoke of their future together. "I will find a way," Lamu promised her. "I will give your father what he asks, no matter how long it takes." But Kesi was troubled. There was something she hadn't told Lamu, a secret that weighed heavily on her heart. She was already carrying a child, and it wasn't Lamu's. Several months earlier, Kesi had fallen in love with another man, Musa, a traveling trader who had passed through the village. Their affair had been brief, but passionate. When Musa left, Kesi thought she could forget about him. But now, with her belly beginning to swell, she could no longer hide the truth. Kesi tried to gather the courage to tell Lamu, but every time she saw the hope in his eyes, she hesitated. How could she ruin everything now? She thought that maybe, just maybe, the truth wouldn't come out. Maybe the child would be born after the wedding, and no one would know. The scandal erupted on the day of the final bride price negotiations. Lamu's family had gathered in Chief Badu's compound, prepared to make their final offer. Just as Alumo was about to speak, an elder from the village interrupted. His voice was loud, filled with anger. "Chief Badu, how can you demand such a high bride price when your daughter carries another man's child?" A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Chief Badu's face turned pale, and Omi gasped, clutching her chest. Lamu looked at Kesi, his heart sinking. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice trembling. Kesi could no longer hide her shame. She fell to her knees and wept. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's true." The crowd erupted into chaos. Villagers whispered and pointed, their eyes filled with judgment. Lamu's family stormed out of the compound, furious and humiliated. Chief Badu stood frozen, unable to speak. His pride, his honor, everything he had built for his family was crumbling before him. As the scandal spread through the village, Kesi's family became the subject of ridicule. Where they once held their heads high, now they walked with their shoulders slumped, avoiding the eyes of their neighbors. People whispered about Omi as she passed, saying she had raised her daughter poorly. Chief Badu no longer sat with the elders in the village meetings. His voice, once respected, was now silent. Lamu, heartbroken and humiliated, returned to his village. He refused to speak of Kesi or the bride price ever again. His love had turned to ash, and the thought of her brought him nothing but pain. Kesai's future was uncertain. No man would want to marry her now, not after the scandal. And as her belly grew, so did the weight of her shame. She stayed mostly in her parents' compound, avoiding the village square where the women gossiped and laughed at her misfortune. Musa, the father of her child, never returned to the village. Kesai wondered if he even knew she was pregnant, but it didn't matter. She would raise the child alone, with or without his help. One day, as Kesai sat by the river, her mother, Omi, came to her. "We cannot change the past," Omi said softly, sitting beside her daughter. "But we must live with the consequences of our choices." Kesai nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for this to happen." "I know," Omi replied, stroking Kesai's hair. "But life is not always kind. We must be strong, even when the world turns against us." Despite the shame and the scandal, life in the village continued. The crops still needed tending, and the seasons continued to change. But for Kesi and her family, nothing would ever be the same. They had learned a hard lesson about greed, pride, and the consequences of hiding the truth. In the end, Kesi gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Though the child's father was not Lamu, the boy was still a blessing to her. She named him Musa, after his father, and raised him with all the love she had. The village eventually moved on from the scandal, but the story of Kesi, the bride price, and the child who wasn't meant to be, would be told for generations to come. And in the hearts of those who heard it, the lesson remained clear. Greed and dishonesty can tear apart even the strongest families, but forgiveness and love have the power to heal.